Tom, thank you very much for coming
Sure.
to Voice of America today. It's February, and during the last couple of years, at least in Washington and elsewhere, February has been a month of heated discussions between Armenians and Azerbaijanis. There are continuous protests. Azerbaijanis are protesting for Khojalu. Armenians are basically coming up with an anti-protest, oftentimes on the Sumgait. Where are we in this general situation? Where is this going in general, and what can be a way out of this?
Well, I mean, this has now become, unfortunately, a regular occurrence every February, which marks, on the one hand, the anniversary of the Sumgait pogroms of 1988, which basically were the kind of triggered the first mass violence in the Karabakh conflict, and then also the Khojaly massacre of 1992. In fact, there may even be a link between the two. Some people have told me that maybe some people who had fled Sumgait were involved in the killings in Khojaly. And of course, I noticed that with every year that goes by, Azerbaijan marks Khojaly even more loudly. They've started using the word genocide, which they didn't use before. We've seen advertisement campaigns in the United States, and the latest innovation is a petition on the White House website, which the White House finally felt compelled to respond to. For me, this is quite depressing. For me, both of those events were real events, tragic events in which people died. I don't believe the conspiracy theories. I believe that Azerbaijanis carried out the Sumgait pogroms. I believe that Armenians killed Azerbaijanis in Khojaly. But it's pointless, in my view, to single out two events. This is a conflict which has many events. Why not mention the shelling of Stepanakert by Guard missiles, the shelling of Shusha? Why not mention Maraga? Why not mention lots and lots of different episodes of violence? And any normal person knows that this is a conflict and in conflicts, bad people do bad things to the other side, and at some point there needs to be a joint reckoning of these things. I'm not saying that it's exactly 50-50. I mean, that would be a bit naive, but just that there should be a joint reckoning of these things. And to be honest, the outside world doesn't take this seriously. You could see the response on the White House website, which was one really of irritation. And in a way, this devalues the memory of those people who died. They're just become part of a political campaign.
Recently, an Azerbaijani writer, Akram Aylisli's book became a major topic of controversy both within Azerbaijan and probably has an impact into the relations between the two societies. There was an interview on RFERL where you spoke about your views on Aylisli's book and what's happening both within the Armenian and Azerbaijani societies. And you also mentioned that, it would be actually nice if the Armenian side, if somebody from the Armenian side would start talking about this. Overall, probably became a matter of, criticism within the Armenian society. I was following Facebook and other places, and some not necessarily only criticism, but what is it that the Armenians didn't get correctly from what you said?
Well, first of all, since I gave that interview, a couple of people have pointed out to me that there is, in fact, the writer Levon Javakhan, who in fact did write a kind of thoughtful, introspective, self-critical work of literature about the Armenian side. So I was corrected on that. But I still think my broad point stands that Aylisli did something very courageous. In a work of literature, he kind of broke the consensus. He broke the taboo in talking about that, in fact, Azerbaijanis beat up and killed Armenians, and some Azerbaijanis behaved well and protected them. He started to be critical of his own society, just as you see in more developed Western societies. Criticism of Abu Ghraib in the United States, or in Britain, my country. You lots of media coverage about bad things the British Army did in Northern Ireland and how we need to take responsibility for that. You know, that's a sign of maturity. I guess I was not really surprised, but some of the Armenian responses I thought were not very helpful to Eilesli. That they were just saying, well, that they were more about the response to Eilesli than Eilesli himself. This very aggressive campaign against him, supported by some members of the government, the stripping him of his awards, the fact that his son and wife were fired from jobs, even this disgusting call for his ear to be cut. And I read a lot of more Armenian responses saying, well, doesn't this prove how terrible the Azerbaijani society and government is, which, you know, in a sense was justified. But for me, that should have been more a catalyst for introspection on the Armenian side. Well, credit to Eilesli, but what, you know, can we also think in the same spirit as him, that he started a conversation, honest conversation of self-criticism? Can we think in that spirit? Now, there are Armenians who think in that, and Armenians is definitely a much more open society than Azerbaijan. It's not a full European democracy, but it's a more open society than Azerbaijan. So that's really what I was saying. Maybe I didn't express myself clearly. I hope I'm expressing myself a little more clearly now. Again, I don't want to say everything is 50-50 in balance. You know, this. I think sometimes one side behaves badly, sometimes another side behaves badly. Clearly, in this case, I'm concerned about tendencies in Azerbaijan, the Eilesli case, the Safarov case, obviously. But I would also say that I see, as someone who visits Azerbaijan, that a lot of this is artificial. I don't believe that much of Azerbaijani society actually greeted Safarov as a hero, and I don't believe that much of Azerbaijani actually condemns Eilesli. I think it's a little artificial. I think a lot of people are showing rather kind of paper loyalty to the government, but actually they think a bit differently in the privacy of their own homes.
Within talking about the Armenian response, it was a difficult time for me as an Armenian and following others, because you didn't know what kind of response would be correct. So oftentimes, I think, even if you wanted to praise him, you thought you would damage him within Azerbaijan, because there would be an argument saying, see, this is somebody who is playing to the Armenians' interests. But many in the Azerbaijani media, both columnists and analysts, were talking about the Eilesli scandal becoming so vivid at a very specific politically important time. Do you see a link between what happened in Ismail and why it happened at the time it happened with Eilesli?
Quite possibly. I think what we're seeing at the moment is, last few years, an enormous gain in strength of the Azerbaijani state, huge revenues, fastest growth rates in the world, and that kind of phase is now over. And it's a phase in which the Azerbaijani government is feeling much more vulnerable and insecure. Now, some of that is the result of others meddling or provoking. I'm sure relations with Russia, as we know, have taken a downturn, particularly over the Gabala radio station, and I'm sure Russia is now, in large part because of that, the Russian government is more aggressive towards Azerbaijan. But I think most of that is due to local factors. I think, and in particular, I think the fact that the central government in Baku doesn't have tight control of what's going on in the regions. There's a lot of regional rivalries between local leaders, a lot of corruption, a lot of abuse of power, and people are now expressing their anger as they did in Ismaili, and the country is becoming less stable. And of course, when the country becomes less stable, you feel more vulnerable. Then it's the one unifying factor in Azerbaijan of everyone, rich and poor, young and old, ethnic minorities and Azeris, is to talk about Armenian aggression. And so, yeah, it is logical in that sense to play the Armenian card.
So in that sense, just quickly, as we saw in the earlier parts of the Syrian crisis, Bashar Assad was trying to attack Israel or Golan Heights in order to unify people around him. Is there a probability that if Aliyev's administration feels so insecure that they don't have any chance, there could be a reassumption of the resuming of the war, starting the war?
I wouldn't go that far. I think I think first of all, Azerbaijan is not Syria. It's more stable than Syria. I mean, it has problems. There could be bigger problems later in this year with when the presidential election happens, but it's not Syria. And also, the Azerbaijani leadership are rational actors. They must know that any kind of military action would be a gamble that they could lose, and they could lose everything if that goes wrong, and it could very easily go wrong. Having said that, there are bad scenarios there, and particularly the scenario around a clash because of the airport in Karabakh opening. One can see both sides have boxed themselves into positions there where it's hard to back down, and I expect at some point in the next few months that there probably will be a flight from Yerevan to Karabakh, and Azerbaijan will find some way of reacting. Now, what that reaction will be and what the Armenian counter-reaction is, it's hard to say, but that could be very dangerous.
Last question about the February and the issues here. As Vamik Vulkan talks about chosen trauma as a phenomena, and actually talking about the Armenian chosen trauma, do you see Khojalı becoming a chosen trauma for the Azerbaijanis?
Well, I think in a sense it already is. A choice has been made to make this the kind of central trauma of the Azerbaijani nation. Now, let me be clear about this. First of all, I believe that something very bad happened at Khojalı. As you know, I did this quite famous now interview with Serge Sarkisyan, where he did not deny it, and even and said, had this phrase about Азербайджанцы подумали, что армяне не могут поднять руку над мирным населением. And also, we have many other sources to know that so that's clear. But certainly the use of it has become much more politicized, much more extreme. So a decision has been made, and that's definitely the case.
Just going forward quickly, obviously this year is marking two presidential elections, one in Armenia, also Georgia actually, the whole region is going to elect presidents. Armenian presidential elections took place February 18th. There are statements from the international observers who basically sealed the deal, saying there have been problems, but enabled basically Western leaders to come out and congratulate Sarkisyan. But it is not over. As we see these days, there are demonstrations taking place, and a diasporan Armenian with, one can say, very different agenda, at least in the pre-election period, may have first of all, gotten for surprisingly a pretty large number of votes and is not accepting the results of the elections and is challenging and is not congratulating the current president. Where is this going in your view, and how this can impact the conflict?
I mean, I think no one, including people in Armenia, know where this is going. In a sense, I think Rafi Hovhannisyan must be wishing that the election had been postponed and the campaign had continued for 2 more weeks. Clearly, he had a lot of momentum, and I think, to me, we saw this in Georgia last year. Public opinion in the Caucasus is not a monolith; it's a wave, and the wave can suddenly build quite quickly. We saw that in Georgia, and we were seeing that in Armenia. But of course, Rafi Hovhannisyan, in the end, didn't get a second round of the vote. And reading the observers' accounts, obviously I'm sure there were violations, maybe some of them quite serious, but election day was not worse than other election days we've seen in Armenia. And we've seen this string of congratulations, including one by John Kerry. So where does this go? Well, I think everything really depends mostly on Serge Sarkisian. I think he is more of a listener than his predecessor, Robert Kocharian. He understands there are problems. He has made a few indications in the past that he realizes some things have to change. And then the question is, he is tied to, as we say in the United States, special interests, very strong special interests in Armenia. Does he want to kind of, in his second term as president, break some of those oligarchic ties, free up the economy? But then he's also a man, so he has to, that's one choice ahead of him, but also he doesn't want to lose control. He's a man who likes to keep control. So really, I think Rafi Hovnessian is a decent man, honest man, but as you've indicated, he's not a local player. He's a catalyst for something else. It's more about a protest vote than it is about Hovnessian himself. So I find it hard to believe that Rafi Hovnessian by himself can build a big movement. I think the next move is up to Serge Sarkisian, and if he doesn't respond well, I'm sure trouble will continue.
Right. Forgetting about the internal political process, just talking about the platforms on which they were campaigning. One of the key elements on Rafi Hovnessian's foreign policy is recognition of Nagorno-Karabakh.
Right.
What can this mean? Assuming tomorrow there is a power change miraculously, or as a result of either Serge's decision or the movement that is growing, obviously. What can this mean in the Armenian-Azerbaijani relations and Karabakh conflict? And Rafi, as a player from diaspora, what could be his factor in the overall context?
Well, yeah, this becomes quite unpredictable because he's clearly a man of principle who believes what he says. On the other hand, were he ever to come to office, he would get a series of top-level phone calls from the White House and the Kremlin saying don't do this, on the grounds that basically this would be the end of the Minsk process. The Minsk process is founded on the idea of ambiguity, negotiations over the final status of Karabakh, and if Yerevan prejudges the status of Karabakh by recognizing Karabakh, the Minsk process is over. You have to start again, and at the moment there's nothing to start with. If the Minsk process is the only process you have, Azerbaijan could respond in all sorts of ways by escalating violence on the line of contact, by trying to use the United Nations, and there will be many unpredictable consequences. All I could honestly say is that the Minsk process would be in crisis if that happened, and that's what Rafi Hovnessian would be told. But I think Serge Sarkisian is also, he has very little room for manoeuvre on this issue. Particularly Azerbaijan is taking a very tough position. He basically accepted what was on the table in Kazan, but I don't think, I'm not even sure he would accept it again today. And the Azerbaijani position is now extremely tough. So I don't see any possibility, unfortunately, of progress on the Karabakh front. Possibly with Turkey there might be a chance of something happening, but again, that's unfortunately, as we know, tied to the Karabakh.
Yeah, we just heard the Turkish government coming out and saying about a possibility of roads and opening, but you still see the tie happening, and no matter.
Well, I think basically the Turkish government is prepared to consider almost everything except opening the border, and for the Armenian government, they want to consider only the opening of the border and then everything else. And then, of course, we have the problem of 2015 coming up with the anniversary, the centenary of the genocide. I think that's actually a bigger issue in the diaspora than it is in Yerevan, but Yerevan will also obviously take it seriously.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Sure.
Thank you for coming here, and hope
Sure.
to see you again soon.
Sure. My pleasure.